From New Hampshire Public Radio and the Howe Library in Hanover, New Hampshire, you're listening to Check This Out, a new literary series where we dive deeply into the works of emerging and diverse authors you may not have discovered yet. I'm your host, Rachel Barenbaum, author of the novel Atomic Anna. I am so excited to be able to share these conversations with you over the next few weeks. Later in this series, we'll be talking to Wahini Vara about her new short story collection, This Is Salvaged. But today, we have Emma Törzs here to talk about her unbelievable debut, Ink Blood Sister Scribe. Beautiful cover if you see it in the bookstore or you go to the library and check it out. This book was just amazing. What I love so much about this book is that, to start off with, it was just fun. It's over 400 pages, and I'm going to be honest,
Rachel,
normally I'm a little worried when I get a book on my desk that's 400 pages, but I picked this book up, I opened it, and I just poured through it in maybe a day. It was so good, I couldn't put it down. It is a rollicking, fun story. Do not be intimidated by the length. It's super fun. We have fantasy, we have magic, we have love, we have adventure, and I couldn't put it down. And afterwards, what really sat with me, and the reason that I wanted to bring Emma on the show to talk to her about this amazing debut, Ink Blood Sister Scribe, is because she's really digging into the weight of expectations. This idea that we all grow up in a family where we're expected to do certain things or be certain people. But there may come a time when we grow up and say, maybe that's not who I want to be. Maybe I really want a different direction. And what do I do about that?
She said,
I thought that was an absolute brilliant theme of this book. It kept me reading alongside all the magic and fun.
She would check in with me every
so often. And so I'm very excited to bring you Emma Törzs today. Emma, hello. Thanks for joining me and welcome to the show.
I did have a novel eventually that I queried.
So I actually met Emma on an island in Maine at an artist residency over the summer. And the first thing she told me about this book was that she had been working with her agent to sell a novel for over 10 years. This book has been over 10 years in the making. Emma, talk to us about the story and how you got here today.
Extremely boring. I mean, I love my agent and I do trust her intuition, and she is still a fan of the book, which I appreciate. But there's definitely something to be said for not publishing the very first book that you ever finish. So I actually feel really grateful that didn't work out and allowed me to go in a totally new direction. That book was literary fiction, like literary realism. And after it didn't sell, I had a sort of reawakening to what made me happy as a writer. It's quite depressing to not sell a book that took 7 years to write. So I had to kind of sit with myself and think, okay, what would be worth trying to write again that would keep me happy and engaged as a writer? And the answer was fantasy fiction. So I sort of went back to my junior high school roots with this. The book is about two half-sisters who were raised by their father to protect their family's library of magical books. And when the book opens, they haven't seen one another for about 10 years. One is in Antarctica, one is in Vermont. And due to certain events, including the death of their father at the hands of one of his own magical volumes, they must slowly begin to work together after being estranged for 10 years. And then there's also a third point of view, a wealthy young man in London who's sort of beginning to wonder about his life of power and whether it's maybe more of a cage.
I love that. So tell us, what is the book about? Give us your elevator pitch.
Oh, big time. I was such an avid reader as a kid, as I think many grown-ups who are now writers were. But I especially was very entranced by used bookstores. I remember, I read so many kids' books and young adult books that had the protagonist finding this magical tome that would let them enter into a different world and totally change their life. And so I would go to used bookstores, at like 10 years old or something, and literally wander the shelves, touching every spine, waiting for like a jolt
So I
of
couldn't put this book down because
recognition
of
or
the
electricity.
magic,
I was
because
totally
it is
sure that I
literally
would find
about the
that
magic
book
of
eventually.
books, right? Books that you can read
I
from,
think
that
as
turn
a
into
writer, we're kind
spells,
of
that
always
make
looking
magic
for that
happen.
spark
And
in a
as a
metaphorical
kid,
way, like,
books
okay,
for
what's
me
the
were
book that's
magic,
gonna
right? And I
open
feel like
up
I was
my
waiting for
doors and
books
change
to
my life?
become
And
magical, right?
I
Like
think every book you
it
write
doesn't
changes your
surprise me
life in a
that,
little way,
a book would have a
whether or not
spell
it's
and be
published.
able to weave magic. And I
But I
felt
really
like
wanted to channel
you
a
just
lot of
reached into my own childhood,
what made me a joyful
right? And put that
childhood
on the
reader
page.
into
Was
a
that
book
also part of your
for
childhood?
adults. Mhm, mhm. I mean, I think to me, despite like magic or fantastical elements, this is a family story. And as you said, very eloquently, it's a story about the expectations of family. And I have a lovely family who, certainly did not charge me with any grandiose tasks as a child. But I still, my sister is one of my favorite people in this world. And I feel very responsible for her in some way. She would hate for me to say that. She's a fully grown woman. But the weight of love, I think, can be really intense, and it feels sometimes like a responsibility when you love someone
And your
or
two main
something
characters,
so much.
Joanna
You
and
want to
Esther,
protect it.
are
You want the
raised
very
to be
best for
guardians
it.
of one
And I
another
think that
and
can
of this
go in a number
magical
of
library.
ways.
And there's
Not
just
all
a
of them
lot of pressure
necessarily
on them,
good.
right? To watch these magical books, to watch over the family's magical legacy.
Mhm.
And there was so much pressure on them from these books. How did you think about that?
Mhm. Yeah. I think the sister dynamic is actually the only thing that really remained constant through every draft. Whether or not that's because I have sisters myself. I have one blood sister and then three stepsisters, so I am no stranger to sisters, as I know you are no stranger to sisters. So I think that was always the heart of the book for me, is sort of following this dynamic between the two of them. They both are looking out for each other in their own ways, and you know, tracking
Yeah, but
how
I
they
think you're
got
right.
through
We
the
all grow
messiness
up
of
with
that
some
dynamic
expectations from our
to
family, whether
relearn
it's,
how to love
that
one
you're
another
supposed
as
to be
adults, I
a
think is part of
doctor
what
or
this
take
book is
over a
about for
family
me.
business or watch over your sister or brother, right? There are expectations that are built into every family. Keep your family safe, right? It might be as
Sure, I
basic
will
as that.
read
And you really wove that into this book.
the very end of
Did that
chapter
just
one.
come
It's
out
just sort
sort
of the
of
last
naturally,
paragraph.
or was that, the
This
result
is
of many,
from
sort
so
of many
the book
drafts that you
alternates
worked
between
through?
three, not points of view because it's all in third person, but it alternates between three perspectives. We have Joanna in Vermont, Esther in Antarctica, where she's an electrician on a research base, and then Nicholas, who comes in a little bit later, but is a very important part of the book, who's in outside London. So this is from Esther in Antarctica, the very end of, yeah, exactly. This is like the dun 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 moment of chapter one. Okay. Leave every year on November 2nd, Esther's father had said, or the people who killed your mother will come for you too. And not only you, Esther, they'll come for
Yeah.
your sister.
So I was wondering if you could
For these
take us
past
into
10
the
years, she
world
had
of this book,
listened,
to
she had
Joanna and
obeyed.
Esther, and if you could read a
Every
little
November
excerpt for
1st, she
us.
had packed up her things, and every November 2nd, she had started moving, sometimes driving for that long day and night, sometimes taking a series of buses, planes, trains, not sleeping. From Vancouver to Mexico City, from Paris to Berlin, from Minneapolis to Antarctica. Every year, like clockwork, except this year. This year, she had ignored his warning. This year, she had stayed. And now it was November 5th. The station was filled with strangers, and one of them had brought a book. Dun, dun, dun.
So, so we're about to hear you launch us on the adventure. So go ahead.
Hmm. Yeah. I think secrets are maybe the biggest recurring theme in this book, which is not something that I noticed until I started doing interviews and people started asking me about all the secrets. And I was like, oh, yeah. Yeah, we got lots
Dun,
of
dun,
secrets in this
dun.
book. And I do think,
And we are launched
the urge
onto
for
the
me is always to
adventure.
like make
If
metaphor
you're
out of
just
these
joining
things
us,
that I
I'm
did
Rachel Barenbaum.
accidentally.
My guest today is
Because of
Emma
course I
Törzs,
meant to put
and
in
you are
secrets
listening
because I
to
wanted
Check
the
This
reader
Out
to be
on New
excited
Hampshire
and pulled
Public
along,
Radio.
but I wasn't
We're
thinking
talking about
about
Emma's new novel,
what a
Ink Blood
theme is.
Sister
That's something that
Scribe.
like you think about
Okay,
after when
Emma,
you're
so we are
analyzing a
launched on
book,
this adventure.
or at
These
least for
two
some of us.
sisters,
Some
they're
writers I know
supposed to
sit
be
down and
guarding
like,
the
I know
magic.
what
They're
themes I want
supposed
to
to
hit.
be guarding one
For me, it's
another.
more like vague, like,
And yet
oh,
they start having this
sisters,
feeling that maybe something
books,
isn't quite right. Maybe they don't
so
know
I realized
everything that's
later that there
happening.
were many, many secrets.
And we really get into
And I
another
think that
theme in this
part
book,
of
which is
this
not
book
just the
is
weight of
in many ways, like I said,
expectations,
like an
but what
updated
happens when you grow up
version of
believing
the
one
young
thing
adult novels
about your
that I loved as a
family,
child.
and then you
And
learn
it's
that a
very
lot of it
hard
was
to
just a
write an
lie.
adult fantasy
What do you do
about
with
it
that?
is a coming of age book still. Like these are older young adults. They're, in their late 20s. But for some of us, it takes longer to come of age. Like you don't just come of age at 16 and then boom, you're of age. Every choice you've made is what will propel you into your future. And I think that secrets are a big part of coming of age and sort of uncovering all the truths that you were told as a child and realizing that none of those things are necessarily true and that you can choose your own truths, and that you take some things your parents teach you and you take it with you forever, and some things you set aside and think, okay, well, that shan't serve me anymore, and I will be an adult without adhering specifically to this thing that my parents told me every single day of my whole life. I don't know if that makes sense. Yes. Yeah, yeah. And I think it's like, a lot of people assume that it is YA because it's a fantasy book and maybe because it has a purple cover. But I have a lot of people being like, oh, I bought it for my 12-year-old. Actually, I think a 12-year-old could really enjoy the book. But I also hope that, like a 78-year-old could enjoy this book. Yeah. That's great. That's exactly what I was hoping. I was also caught up in the
That makes
story.
sense.
This book was
So to
really
be clear,
fun
this
to
is not a
write.
YA. This
And
is
every
not
time
a
it
book for
wasn't fun,
kids.
I
This
tried to
is
make it
grown-up adult
fun
fiction.
again.
This is about two
And
grown-up
hopefully that
women
translates
who are coming
on
of
the page.
age
It
and
was really
really
me
learning
amusing
about
myself
their
for
past and what
400
they want their
pages.
future to be. So this is, adult fiction, as it were, just to be clear.
Hmm.
Absolutely. So I want to go back to what you said before, was that you didn't really think about the theme of secrets, that you were telling a story. And I think that's why it just read so quickly and so beautifully. It was like an adventure. And I also was not hung up on the theme of secrets or figuring out, how to deal with the weight of expectations, because I was just caught up in the story.
I am fascinated by like market classifications and genre in general. It's another thing that I think I didn't think about while I was writing the book. I wasn't thinking about how I would put this book on shelves, for better or for worse. Some writers are really good at thinking about that. It didn't occur to me. I was just writing the book that I was writing.
It definitely did.
I thought of it
while
sort
we're
of
talking about
generally
the different ways that people have classified
novel,
this
and that's
book,
really as far as
congratulations, Good Morning America chose this book as their selection for Pride Month.
And your publisher begins to
So
market
the book
it,
starts
that's
out
when
with
all
a
these,
bang.
like,
There's an
subcategories
amazing
get
love
sort of put on
scene
your book, and
between
people decide how
one
to
of the
market it.
sisters, Esther, and another woman, Pearl.
Very happy with
and
people
they just
thinking
happen to
of it
be
as
two
a
people
queer
that are
book,
in love in
if
the
it
book.
helps
And their
queer
love
readers
scene and love
find the
story is
book.
as much a part as
So I'm,
Joanna's
that I
love
was
for
like
her
very
sister,
proud
right? The sisterly
that it
love,
was
and
a
then
Pride
Joanna
Month
falls in
pick.
love
I
later
was really
in the book.
stoked about that.
And so there's just lots of love in this
I didn't think
book.
of it as a queer book while I was writing it.
I'm not sure that I would have called this a queer novel.
Many, if not
and yet
most
that's
of my
one of the
friends
ways
are
it's being
queer.
classified.
Most of them are
What do you
queer
think
women.
about that?
It would be weirder to me to write a book without queerness in it. I think if I just wrote a totally straight book, that would feel much more forced and like a weird lie. Than having, a love scene between two women on page 6 or whatever, which I do understand might be weird to some readers, or out of the norm. But for me, that's very much my norm. So I'm very happy for people to think of it as a queer book if it helps them find that book. But I also don't think it is, I think queerness is really interesting because you can sort of apply a queer lens to a lot of things. I have had some queer readers say that this book like really meant a lot to them, and that what you were talking about, that weight of expectation and family, they interpreted as sort of like a queer story. Like that weight of expectation can be especially painful for queer people. It's a totally different set of expectations. I was not thinking about that at all. Maybe that was part of what was going on in my subconscious. But that wasn't like the metaphor that I was focusing on as I was writing. So I think it's just kind of fun to see your book read by other people and labeled by other people. It's a very trippy experience, honestly. Because, not all of us are thinking every step of the way about, how it will be shelved or labeled or perceived. That comes later. Totally. Yeah. No, and like actually the interviewer on Good Morning America pointed something out that it made me happy that she noticed, where she was like, well, these two women are already together. It's not like a love story or a coming out story. I think, which is often maybe what you think of when you think of queer literature. You think of a love story or the coming out, and they're just together, and yeah, they start the book together. I won't tell you how they end. You'll have to read the book to see if they stay together. Mhm.
Right. You were just writing an adventure, and you were talking about family expectations, sister love.
Mhm.
And for me, the way I read it was just, one sister fell in love with a woman and one fell in love with a man. And, that's it. That's not the heart of the
Mhm.
story at all. That's
Yeah,
just
I'm
the way
curious,
life goes.
Rachel, if you don't mind talking about your experience with that, since you yourself have written several books, and Atomic Anna is sort of like a genre straddler in some ways. And I'm curious how that was marketed and what your experience was like while you were writing it. Were you thinking about these classifications? Hmm.
we were just talking about your book being classified as a queer book, when in fact I had just read it as this super magical adventure. And we open when two women are in love, and then this one woman is pulled away from that love so that she can go and save her sister and save her family. And really, what this book about is the weight of expectations, right, and sisterly love. So there's some really big themes there. But we're also talking about this interesting aspect of selling a book, which is how do you classify a book? How do you reach readers?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense to me. It is sort of, I am like a genre reader in that I seek out
Yeah,
categories of books
I
to
love
read. I
that we're
read
talking
super,
about this
super widely,
because
but sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm in the
I
mood
always
for
feel
fantasy.
like you, that when
Sometimes
I
I think,
write a
okay,
book,
I'm
I'm
in the
just
mood
writing
for
the
some
story.
like
I'm writing the
neo-noir
adventure,
techno
and it
thriller.
is, capital
Um,
F fiction or capital L
that is,
literature.
well, this
That's
is a
it,
chance for me
right?
to plug
But then
one of my
when
best friends has a
Atomicana went
novella
into
coming out
production and marketing
in
and
the
PR,
spring
right,
called
everyone started calling
These
it
Fragile
science
Graces,
fiction
This
or
Fugitive
women's
Heart by
fiction
Izzy
or
Wasserstein.
historical
And I
fiction, right?
noticed
You get all
that
these
her
subgenres.
marketers are
And I feel
using the
like sometimes
term
that just takes
neo-noir
away
techno
from
thriller,
the heart of the
which
story,
just means it's
because
like a
I
mystery
don't
set in a
read
sort
because
of
I want to
like
read,
science
a queer
fictional
book or
kind of
a
cyberpunky
book about
universe.
history
But I loved
necessarily.
that.
I
I
want to
just love
read an
repeating the words
adventure. I want to
neo-noir
read
techno
something that's
thriller
going
to
to take me
myself.
away, something that's
It's a
magical,
new
like
one.
your book, right?
Yeah,
That's
but
going to
like I
just
think that also
suck
sometimes
me
I'm like,
in for
I
400
just really want to read a
pages,
book that
you know?
has
And so
a
I love
brotherly
that as a way of looking
relationship
at
and
literature
some
more
like
than any
daddy
of these,
issues.
sort of
And like how you can't
labels
really
that we
look
put on
for
it.
that genre. Sometimes I'm like, give me some like masculine
Yeah.
angst. I don't know. Or like, I want to read something about, I don't know, mothers hating their children. Who knows? There's like all kinds of emotional genres that we can't really look for.
What is that?
Mhm.
That is a new one. That is a new one.
I was thinking about books in this particular novel as a resource like any other. And I guess this is one theme that I did have in mind while I was writing it, or, something I was thinking about was intergenerational wealth and how wealth gets passed down through families, and how that sort of perpetuates
Yeah,
oppression and hegemonic
I love that.
structures
All right, let's
in
get
the
back to
world.
Ink Blood Sister
Um,
Scribe.
and so that is like the
So another one
lofty
of the things that
explanation.
I
And then sort of the more
absolutely
minute
loved about this
explanation
book was
is
the idea that it is
that
set
I
in a
was thinking
library,
about
and
the
these
weight
two
of family
sisters, Joanna and
expectations, and I
Esther,
wanted to give it
and
solid
Nicholas,
form
the
in some ways.
scribe, are
And,
really their lives
generational
are
wealth
centered around
includes
protecting
weird
books.
expectations, I
But these
think.
libraries are
I'm
sort
not
of a
actually
source
familiar
of
with
power
it
for
on a
everybody, right? Like,
personal
not
level,
anyone can just come and look at
but
them. In fact,
I
Esther and
have read
Joanna guard
about
the books and don't let them out
rich
of their
kids.
house. They
I've
don't let
met a
anybody else
few.
see them.
And it
So how
comes
did
with
you
a
think
lot of
about that sort
expectations,
of
just like any
idea of
family
power
does.
in the book and a
But I
power
wasn't thinking
struggle
about
for
that so much as I was
books?
thinking about kind of critiquing this idea that resources should be passed down only through family and kept hidden, in some way. Yeah. Right. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and there's an argument in the book made by some people that these spells and books are dangerous, which is true. It's not a lie. Some of them are dangerous, and should not be allowed in the hands of the civilians, so to speak. Um, and I would say that knowledge is always more dangerous when it's suppressed than when it is shared. That's sort of my general belief. And I would say the same for books. I think that I feel more danger when I see books being banned than I do when I happen to read a book that I personally find distasteful.
But you
or
even took
threatening
that
in
a
some
step
way. And there are
further,
plenty.
because if somebody controls a
But I think,
library,
yeah,
it's not
for
just a
me,
resource like oil,
the suppression
right?
is
It's
more dangerous than
knowledge.
the
And
sharing.
so what they're controlling is what the rest of the world can ever know, right? So if you don't let a book out, someone will never learn that spell, or they'll never learn that magic even exists. And so there was also this sort of higher question of, how much do we tell the
Yes,
masses,
it's something I
right?
find
Or the
very
people?
stressful to think about. And it really breaks my heart to think about all the kids who are not finding their, soul book the way that I did when I was a kid. And that really was, having a vast library and a friendly librarian and parents who would let me read whatever I wanted was so meaningful to me and has shaped my life. Obviously, I grew up to be a writer. So I can't say enough for letting kids read some wacky stuff. Mhm.
Yeah. I love that you took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say it felt like this modern
Mhm.
movement to ban books, right? And literally take them off the shelves. They are no longer allowed to circulate. That is a big theme in this book.
Yeah, why are you hurting your characters? Well, okay, so the symbolism that I only realized long after writing the book, again, like I always just want to make a metaphor out of everything, but is, writing itself. Writing is extremely difficult and draining, and I am still one of those people that has to do it. It feels, like that's just what I was born to do. That's my life's path. It's too late to give up now. I'm not skilled at anything else. I, you know, uh, so there is that metaphor that's like writing is exhausting, but
So
you have to
another
do it
big
anyway.
theme, or
But
sort of
in
one of
a
the
more specific sense, when I was
things
thinking
that
about the magic
happens in this
system,
book
I
is we find out
wanted
that one or two,
a
perhaps, of the
system
characters, I don't want to give
that
too much away, are
anyone could
scribes,
access
which means
to
they
a
can
certain
actually
point.
write magic, but it
So
requires
in my magic
blood.
system,
And so it's
anybody,
literally
regardless of
killing the
family or
characters to
bloodline or
write this
anything like that,
magic,
can pick
right, and
up
to
one of
put it
these
out
magical
there.
books and enact the spell by
And so
reading the book out
why?
loud.
Why are you
So you
making
don't
this,
have to be
these
special at
scribes,
all
this
to
written
pick up
magic
one of these books
kill
and read it.
people?
Um,
What's the symbolism
and then I
there?
also wanted to play around with the idea of a chosen one and who in this book is the chosen one. There are other types of interaction with these books. Some people can hear the books, they hear the magic and can kind of follow the trail. They can tell when a magic book is around. And then other people can write the books, but they cannot enact the magic of the books as you learn. So there's sort of a give and take. Who is the chosen one here? And which is the better power, so to speak? Is it to be in every person that can just pick up the book and enact magic wherever and however? Which is honestly how I think of reading in some ways. It's a magic system that once you learn how to read is accessible to you forever. And then some of us write those books, through toil and trouble. And then other people are, you could spin the metaphor further, like critics or reviewers or and they're the ones that can hear a different frequency. So I was just kind of interested in playing around with a magic system that was inclusive but also specific. I know, it's wild. I did once read somewhere that intensive brain activity can like make you tired. Like it can fatigue you. It can fatigue you. Like your body literally gets fatigued if you just think for 10 hours, which I don't recommend to anyone and yet keep doing. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, let's go. I am anti-chosen one.
And writing is
for many,
exhausting.
many reasons.
When I
as you
write 10
probably
pages
tell.
in a day, I feel like I've run a
Oh,
marathon.
I love the chosen one trope. I am like a total sucker for it. I grew up reading chosen
Make you
one
tired
books.
is an understatement, I
I can't
think.
even think of any. Harry
Right?
Potter is an obvious
It can what?
one. Anything where it's like the one character has the weight of the world on their shoulder. One of my absolute favorite novels is The Golden Compass by Philip Pullman, which I think at
So this
any
theme
age
of the
is
chosen
genuinely just
one.
a perfect
I
novel.
love this
I love the
theme.
whole
It's a
series,
classic
but that
trope,
first book
especially for fantasy.
I think is stunning.
And the way
And
you're
it
talking
is about
about
a
it,
chosen
though,
one
is not
who
that
does
there's
not
one
know that
chosen
she is
one.
chosen.
It's that each of your
And
characters
the
needed
way
to
that
find their
that
place in the world.
interacts
And
with the
again, it
story
really
is
brings
really
us back to this
interesting.
idea of the
And I
weight of expectations versus finding your own true self. And I just love that theme, so I
Yep.
want to keep talking about it. The
Yeah,
chosen
totally.
one. So, can you tell me more
And
about
I
how you
think,
thought
like,
about this, right? The chosen one
I
versus
don't know
just,
why I keep going back to
being
this
who
like
you want to
metaphor
be.
of being a writer, but I feel so lucky to have known from a young
What?
age like
I
what
would
my
not have guessed
personal
that.
power was. It was very clear that I was unskilled in other realms, but I was always like a really strong reader. I think I've always been a strong writer, and adults told me all my life, you are good at this. You are really good at this. This is what you should do, which is really nice in some ways. But in other ways, I wonder what else I could have done if anyone had told me I was good at literally anything else. There's lots of things that really interest me as an adult that didn't interest me as a kid because I was terrible at them. Like, I'm much more interested in science now, having failed much of high school science, in part because I was like, well, who needs science when I'm like a language
And
person?
similarly,
I
you
was like
have
taking 3
Esther,
languages and
right, who
writing a novel in
doesn't
my spare
realize her
time.
powers either, right, until
So
pretty
I
far
think that's
into
like
the
a
book.
roundabout way of saying that a lot of the ways that we are told that we're special are both true, maybe, but also kind of predetermined. And there are so many ways to distinguish oneself within one's community and within one's family and around one's friends. And like, there's so many reasons for a person to be special and lovable and important and needed that have really nothing to do with like any kind of fake innate talent. I don't know. I just think about that a lot. Like, what would it be like if I wasn't a writer? How would I distinguish myself in this world? I have no idea. I have a lot of friends who like don't have a particular passion the way that I do, but I love them and need them, and they bring so much else into the world. So there are just many different ways I think of like distinguishing oneself and finding a place. Yeah, like finding I think all of us in some ways are chosen. Um, yes, and I think that for some, it's more of a struggle to figure out in what way. I want to believe that. I do think everyone is special. I don't like everyone, but I think everyone like has their own, special power that they can bring to the world. Some people use it for evil, but yes. This again is something in retrospect I realized I wrote this book during quarantine, during
So the chosen
lockdown,
one isn't necessarily
when I was
the one chosen one in the
at
book. It's
home
more
all
like
day, which is
finding your
not an
place in the
experience
world.
I have ever had before. I am a super busy, like very social person. It's usually I have to force myself to stay at home. Um, and for almost 2 years, I taught online for a year and a half. So I wasn't seeing students, I wasn't seeing colleagues. I was living with 5 other people, so I wasn't as lonely as some. And I'm incredibly grateful to my beloved housemates for sustaining me during that time. But this is totally a
So
pandemic
another big
novel.
universal
Everyone
theme,
is
fat,
isolated.
juicy
I
theme
mean,
that
Joanna
you weave
is
into
locked
these
away
pages
in a house in Vermont.
is
Literally
this,
can't be out past
this
dark for
idea
magical
of
reasons.
loneliness, even in the
Esther
middle of
is
family,
on a
and also
research base
loneliness
in
when you lose a
Antarctica,
parent.
about as far as
There
removed as you
are,
can
right,
get.
all of the
Nicholas
main
is
characters
literally
pretty much
locked
have
in a
lost a
house
parent or someone very
in
close to
England.
them.
I mean, they're all just
And
locked
even
in
though
their
they have
houses,
people that they know love
which
them,
is what
they
I
feel
was
so
experiencing
lonely.
at the time. I was locked
Can you
in my
talk
house.
about that for
I really
us?
wasn't going anywhere. And I think I was experiencing isolation maybe for the first time in my adult life, despite the fact that I had more people around me than most people do in such situations. And, you know, I was Zooming all the time with my friends, talking to my family. But it was a profoundly unsettling experience. And I fear boredom and loneliness probably more than any things in this world, you know, aside from the obvious ones like mass catastrophe and, you know, real problems. But the small petty emotional problems that I fear are boredom and loneliness. And so I think I wanted to write my characters out of that isolation that I was experiencing at the time. Mm. Um, it is not for me. It is not. I love people. I'm a total people person. I mean, you've met me. I'm super chatty. I love being around people, but I think of myself as an in-person person. I don't, the thought of crafting my personality on the internet causes me such
Yeah.
existential stress that it never seemed uh, worth the benefits. It's really hard to be a writer with no social media. Like, I'll be honest, it's definitely um, a knock on
So,
my
Emma, we're
career,
going to
probably in
shift
some ways. Like, I
the
have
interview a
friends
little
who
bit and talk
have
about
gotten
you
amazing
as
opportunities through
a
social
writer
media
out
and
in the
have met
world. We have a
incredible
lot of
people. And I'm
listeners
not
who
anti
want to
social
be
media in
writers, who are
general,
writers, or who just
but
love
for
writers.
me, it is
So,
not, it does not
um,
feel authentic.
I first
It's
I
not
want to
in
just
line with my
ask you about
values.
social
As
media.
much as
I've
I
been
can, I
dying to
try
ask
to
you this
live
because, of
according to
course,
my
when I
values.
Google stalk
In some
you,
ways, it's really
I
hard.
find
Like, I
your
buy from
website and
Amazon
it
all the
says
time.
no social media.
But I can't,
So
I just can't do
why
social
no social
media.
media?
And yeah, it just doesn't feel authentic to who I am. And it felt forced. They have actually been so understanding. And when I first, because I brought it up in the initial meetings with them, you know, when they were thinking about buying my book, I was like, just so you know, I will never get social media. There's nothing you can do to make me do it. It's a hard line for me, it's a boundary. And they were like, well, you haven't had it yet. So if you just got it right now, you'd probably be terrible at it. So, you know, like that's our job. We're here to market your book. We have social media. Um, so they have been super understanding, and I feel incredibly grateful for that aspect of the publication process. Um, yeah, I do. Sometimes I feel left out. You know, everybody's on the socials doing the cool stuff. But it's, yeah, it's just, I would rather have no one read my book than get social media, I think is although who knows? Check in on me in like 5 years and
I'm
I reserve the
sure
right to change my
I'm
mind
sure
at
your
any
agent
moment.
and PR people are like, "Come on, Emma, get on Instagram."
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't look lazy to me. You can tell me, but it looks very hard to be on social media trying to make friends. For me, it's much more natural to make friends in person. And I am lucky in that I have a pretty flexible work schedule because I am on the academic schedule, which means I get, you know, a month in winter off and then 3 months, 4 months in summer off, which is honestly wild if you think about it. That's a lot of time off, which is one of the reasons that I will stay in academia for as long as they let me. But it gives you a lot of time to travel, especially if you have no children, which I do not. And, my cat needs me, but for the most part, I don't have that many responsibilities here at home, and my housemates take care of my cat.
Fair enough.
So I
fair
have
enough.
traveled a lot. I've done a ton of residencies.
The other thing is that you are
including the
very
one
good
that I
at
met
finding
you at.
writer communities outside of
And
social.
I made a bunch
right? For
of
most
lovely
people, it's sort of
friends
the
at that
lazy way of
residency.
finding a
I mean,
community.
here we are
But you
talking
are very
today.
good at finding other
So I've
friends
done, I
and
think,
other
like 10
circles.
or
So can you
12
talk about that? How
residencies
have you
and
built
have
your
kept
writer
a couple
community
friends
without
from
social
each
media?
one. And I have lived in Minneapolis for almost 20 years. And I've lived in the same house for 11 years, going on 12 years. My college best friend lives 3 blocks away. I've just been really lucky in maintaining a long-term community and friends. And then a big thing is that I did this 6-week sci-fi fantasy workshop in Seattle called Clarion West, which is 18 writers for 6 weeks in a house. It's like the real world nerd edition. And it was just really intense. It's like 3 hours a day of workshopping. So you're reading a ton, you're writing a story a week. And we all got incredibly close. And there are a few of them that I talk to, not just every day, but like many, many times a day. And they have become really indispensable to my writing process. Sometimes, yeah. It is so fun too. Let me just put in a plug for the
Yeah.
delight of being around a bunch of writers and artists is, yeah, it's really fun. Mhm, 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 mhm. Find people to interview on New Hampshire Public Radio.
I love that. So the residency circuit, you're very good at it. It's an
Mhm.
amazing resource for writers. The more competitive ones will basically invite you to come and stay, and all you have to pay for
Yes
is your
and
transportation
no.
to
I think
wherever
it's
the place
easy to
is.
teach
Often you don't have
writing
to pay for the
because I
transportation.
love talking
There are
about
others that
writing. I
require you to
love talking
pay
about
to stay
books.
there, right? But there are lots of options
Students
for
that take
people who are looking
creative
for
writing
communities
classes,
in real life
especially
where they
like
can
the
meet
upper
writers
level
and
ones,
write
are super
together.
self-selecting. So they love talking about writing. They love talking about books. I have I the other side of this question that people ask me sometimes is it
It
possible
is. It's a
to
different
teach
kind of
writing?
person,
Like,
right?
can
Who
you
will
teach
pick
someone
up
to
their
be a good
life and
writer?
just go, live on an
Um,
island for 2
I
weeks or,
think for
live in a
me, the
lodge
first
or,
step,
do sci-fi
which I
together
have
for 6
a
weeks,
little more
right?
control
It's an
over, is
amazing way to
teaching
build your
students to be
community.
good
And then you find
readers.
readers and you
And
find people to hold you up because it can be lonely when you're a writer
encouraging
sometimes.
reading in them as much as possible. I have a lot of first year intro students who come and they want to write
Yes,
stories.
yes. So, Emma,
And I'm
you
like,
are an
how
assistant
many short
professor
stories
at
have you read
McAllister
in your
College.
life? And they're like,
And
like
I know
two,
you love teaching. I know you
like, well, you
love
have
your
to read
students
about
very much because you
500
talk
more,
about them very
and
affectionately.
then come and talk to me. But
So
I do
I
think it's
just
possible
want to
to
know, though,
teach
is it hard to
people
teach
to be
writing?
better writers than they are. There is such a thing as innate talent. Sometimes I'll get a student where I'm just like, good grief, kid, what have you been, where do you come from? And they're like, I don't know, New Jersey. They're just like amazing writers, and you can tell it just comes from a completely natural place. Then I have other students who show up, and I am lucky because I get to see them for 4 years growing as writers. Like, it is, nothing is more fun to me than when I've had a student in my intro class and then in their senior year, like reading the work that they've developed. And I have definitely seen students become much better writers, some really good writers, via a lot of reading and a lot of hard work, and actually trying to use the techniques that we talk about in class. Like, you can learn how to write a good image. That's not innate. To some people it is, but other people really have to work on their imagery. And they can. You really can. So I do think that you can learn how to write, but you have to actually do your homework, kids. I have it totally depends on the circumstances of the students. I have a lot of international students, and an MFA is a great way to extend your visa for a few years and write and make writing friends. So for international students who want to stay in the country, honestly, I often say, like, yes, an MFA is a great choice for you if you don't want to go to a different kind of graduate school. And that is just a purely practical answer. And then the other question is, I mean, always tell them, don't ever pay for your MFA. And I will just repeat this publicly. Never pay for an MFA. It even rhymes. You can remember it that way. Unless you are independently wealthy or your parents don't mind paying for a degree that, it's still a luxury degree in a lot of ways. Some programs will treat it a little bit more professionally and teach you about resources and opportunities and how to be a working writer in the world.
When people come to you and say, should I apply for an MFA?
Like an arts degree.
What do you say?
Which is, practical workshopping, like a studio degree. So you're writing a ton, you're in the workshop, and that is still, to my mind, it's a luxury degree. However, it is also a terminal degree, meaning I do not have a PhD, but with my MFA, I can teach at the college level. So if you want to be a creative writing professor, by all means get your MFA. However, the terminal degree also comes with caveats where it's like, MFA plus a substantial record of publication is sort of the equivalent of a PhD for academic hirers. But if you just want to take yourself seriously as a writer and meet a bunch of other writers and live and breathe writing and books and totally immerse yourself, see if it's for you, I highly recommend an MFA. I had a blast in my MFA. I loved the people that I studied with. I loved my cohort. I think it helped that I was in a beautiful place. I was in Missoula, Montana. So I was also just hiking resplendent mountains every morning. But it's not for everybody. It's a little bit intense, some programs more intense than others. So it's a totally variable answer. Well, many, many MFA programs are free. So some of them have, I have to plug in my computer, sorry. Some MFA programs have full scholarships where you get a complete tuition remittance, and oftentimes you also get a fellowship. So, for example, like a famous one is the University of Austin, Texas. The Mishner program is famously well funded. If you go there, I think you don't even teach, and they just give you something like $25,000 to attend. So not only is it free, but it's fully funded. My program was free and funded, but in order to get paid by them, I had to teach throughout my graduate career. So I taught creative writing classes as I was a graduate student, which I liked because I knew that I wanted to be a professor. And so it gave me teaching experience while I was still in graduate school. But many programs are fully funded. And some programs are just like not completely funded, but they're not as expensive as some that I might name in
And if
New
you
York
don't pay
City
for it,
that
who's
cost
going to pay for
literally
it? Because there are
$100,000.
tuition bills.
To me, that is unthinkable. Yeah, thanks. Okay, we're good. So advice about writing is very different than advice about publishing, as you probably know. Advice to new writers, I would say if you're very new, try to write about things that you are still curious about rather than trying to write things that you think that you have the answer to. I think exploratory writing is almost always more interesting than didactic writing, writing that thinks that it has the answer and is attempting to impart that answer to their reader, especially if you are a new writer. Didacticism is a tool that can be wielded in seasoned hands, I think, better than in new hands. So just making lists of questions about things, even if what you want to write about is,
I'll let
pirates.
you plug in there for a minute.
How many questions do you have about pirates? you will find a story if you write 15
So,
questions about pirates. I
Emma, what
guarantee
advice
it.
do you have for new writers or people who
So
are
that would be
just
my
trying
number
to
one
get
piece of
published for the
advice.
first time?
For publishing, my number one piece of advice is be nice to everyone. And unless they really deserve your ire, just try to be nice to everyone. Even people that you think are beneath you on the ladder of writing. You never know if the person that you were rude to at that conference is going to be the next bestseller, and they're going to remember how rude you were to them. So just be a decent person to everybody, and remember that publishing is both a gate-kept world and also a real community. So everyone in it is a person, and they know people. So just be nice. Don't be rude. Yeah, yeah, just be nice to people. My family motto growing up, courtesy of my father, was safety, politeness, and critical thinking. And I think that that has served me very well in life, and I would repeat it now. Safety, politeness, and critical thinking. Yeah, no, there is no sequel at the moment. I have no plans, let's put it that way. I did leave it a little bit open. Uh, I was hoping for some fan fiction maybe, but that hasn't happened yet. Um, yes, it is open. I may return to it at some point. My next book will almost certainly not have anything to do with this book, however.
I feel like that's good life advice. Just be nice to people. Just be nice.
People often ask me and other writers, what parts of this are true, what really come from your real life. Actually, in this book, that is the only thing that I really just stole wholesale
Let's hear
from
it
my
again.
own family history, is that my paternal family
I
were
really love
actors in
that.
Budapest, just
So, is
like the
there a
paternal
sequel to
family of
Ink Blood
the
Sister
sisters in
Scribe?
this
Because you
book.
left us on a
Um,
cliffhanger.
and, I think it was important to me. The characters are Jewish. My family is Hungarian Jewish. There is a really fascinating legacy of silence that I have encountered from my own family around, the trauma of World War II and coming over to America as, people running away essentially from the Nazis.
Okay.
And some of my
So,
family
Emma,
survived,
your
and
family
that's
came
how
to America
I
from Hungary,
live on this
and
earth
your
today,
characters in
which
the
is
book
quite
are also
humbling.
from
I
Hungary,
mean,
and we see some
every
of those roots in
family
there.
is a
How
story
did that
of
really influence the
improbable
characters, and
survival,
how did
really, no
you
matter
weave
where
that
you are
into the
from.
book, that
For some of
history,
us,
that
it's much
family history
closer
of
than
your
for
own
others.
family?
Uh, and my family's survival feels really close, but it was not really talked about. Um, and, my paternal family, I am excluding my father from this. For the most part, he is a lovely and well-adjusted person. But his parents, had some trauma that was enacted upon my father, and that he really felt as a child and then didn't talk about to me, but I could feel the echoes of that and didn't know how to talk about it. So I think in a lot of ways, like that secret keeping that happens all throughout the book is this kind of weird, like generational Jewish silence in some ways. Um, so it did feel important to me that these characters related to that part of my own story and my own understanding of family and what it means to not talk about things in a family. Hmm. Yeah.
And that's how we get to so many secrets and lies and expectations, really, right? The weight of the history of your family is in your characters. It's in every page of this book. Yeah. Thank you so much, Emma Törzs. Thank you, everybody. You've been listening to Check This Out. I'm your host, Rachel Barenbaum, author of the novel Atomic Anna. My guest today was Emma Törzs. We were talking about her new book, Ink Blood Sister Scribe. I'm here to bring you emerging and diverse authors, books and ideas I think you should be reading and talking about. If you love these books as much as I do, and I know you will, go to your library and check them out, or go to your local bookstore and buy a copy. This show is brought to you through a partnership between the Howe Library in Hanover, New Hampshire, and NHPR. Our producers today are Jared Jenish, Megan Coleman, and NHPR's Emily Quirk. The Howe Library director is Ruby Simon. NHPR's program director is Emily Quirk. The show is sponsored by the Jack and Dorothy Byrne Foundation and the Howe Library Corporation. Thank you for listening. I'll be back next time with the author Wahini Vara, and we will be talking about her brand new collection of short stories, This is Salvaged. Thank you.